welcome to Pitch Boxing, a very special piece with boxing expert as well as many other realms of his life, Gabriel Montoya, on holiday in Paris. How are you, Gabriel?
I'm doing great, man. Other than the leaf blowers outside, I'm great.
Yeah, no, we're all right. We can't hear them. We're all good. Thank you very much for your time. For people's reference, you are a writer, kind of more so in the past and now around boxing. More an observer these days. Is that maybe potentially fair to say?
Absolutely. Kind of casual,
Casual,
as they
yeah, I'm
might
with you.
say.
I'm with you. I watch the stuff that I'm interested in. I ignore the stuff that I'm not.
Yeah.
Outside of that, a world of directing, acting, writing, all sorts in that world as well. So, do you want to fill people in on where you sit in that kind of sphere before we move on to the boxing?
In the theater world,
Yeah.
I've been an actor for a long time, since I was 18. About before I ever wrote about boxing, I did about 17 years of theater up in Northern California, um, writing, directing, producing. Uh, but mainly my focus is as a performer. That's generally my focus these days. And I just completed a 10-city tour in the U.S. Of a play called The Box by Sarah Shord, who's a survivor of solitary confinement. And the play is about men in solitary and focuses. It's kind of based in part on the 2013 California prisoner hunger strike, which was the largest prison hunger strike in U.S. history. Something like 30,000 prisoners all went on strike at the same time to try to get, as my character says, pull-up bars and jalapenos. That's basically what they ended up getting. But we were meeting with partners all across the country, different types of prison abolitionists trying to reform our horrible prison system in the United States. So
Awesome.
that's kind of my focus these days. And I live in LA and just doing the actor grind,
But in the past, you've also, to bring us back to the boxing world, written for huge names such as The Ring. Doesn't really get much bigger than that in terms of boxing writing. And I know that you've also had involvement in the world of, not involvement in the bad sense, but involvement in the world of PEDs, being a consultant, is that right, on certain fights? I remember Pascal Butte, was it?
Oh yeah, yeah. I wrote for Max Boxing. Started with doghouseboxing.com, which was a sister site to Max Boxing and secondout.com. I've written for Boxing Scene, Ring, and Boxing News over in the UK. And during that time, I was writing, from 2006 to about 2016, 2017, somewhere in there, and also for Bad Left Hook. But in that course of that time was when Floyd Mayweather asked Manny Pacquiao to, if you want to beat the best, you got to take the test. And I had no idea what any of that stuff meant. By the time I was done, I'd written 75 pieces on performance enhancing drugs, broke several stories about PEDs in the sport, the Lamont Peterson positive, Andre Berto, Antonio Tarver, and a few others. I exposed later on in MMA when Dana White accused Kung Lee of testing positive for HGH. I got the paperwork and proved that he'd never even been tested for HGH. And some might argue, at least one of my friends argues, that that was the precursor to the UFC's USADA program, because they were about to get exposed for the fraud that was what they did to Kung Lee. That's still up on bloodyelbow.com, an MMA site. But then what you were referencing, in the midst of that, that was when Butte and Pascal were going to fight. And Jean Pascal had hired Memo Heredia, who's an ex-PED dealer, and now apparently, an ex-PED dealer, but now is a strength and conditioning coach to many fighters. I think his latest, which is rumored, is Jake Paul. Although after a picture of him and Paul appeared on Instagram, on Heredia's Instagram, his Instagram went private, and you can't access it unless he lets you follow him. Yeah, that doesn't sound shady at all. But I ended up designing a program at the Team Butte's behest, a PED testing program. They didn't want to use VADA because Memo Heredia didn't want to use VADA. And so I've designed something, handed it over to them, and Jim and Interbox, the two promoters, used it for, they made an agreement there, and I think they used it for several other fights. I don't know if they still use that protocol. I think everybody just now kind of uses VADA. So there was some controversy about that, about a writer kind of crossing over. But for me, boxing is a wild world, the wild west of sports. It's as it's been called, the red light district of sports. And so I felt that the sport needed an advocate, and that if people were asking for my help and I had knowledge to give, I handed it over, and they eventually, put scientists in charge of the whole thing, and set up, protocols with Claridium to get the samples and handle all that the way VADA does. They're all, on the up and up. They kind of took it away, and I just, did my part to help. As my grandfather taught me, try to leave a place better than you found it, and that's kind of what I tried to do.
Excellent. What's your natural position around doping within the sport? From a personal perspective, I'm a cynic. I assume 90% plus of the top level boxers are probably using some form of PED to enhance their chances of winning, making more money, etc., etc. Would you kind of agree with that, or do you think it's maybe less prevalent than 90% and maybe somewhere lower or higher?
It's hard for me to put a percentage on it. I think a lot of people are doping. I think that the administrators in some ways leave wide open loopholes. One of the first pieces I kind of made an administrator mad with was the former executive director of Nevada State Athletic Commission, Keith Kaiser. I wrote a piece called New York, Nevada, and the TE ratio loophole. And it was basically the TE ratio is like testosterone to epitestosterone. Everybody's pretty much 1-to-1, right? But in world sports, like from WADA on down, the threshold is 4-to-1. But in New York and Nevada, it's 6-to-1. So you can have 6 times the amount of testosterone in your body. Now, they're only generally doing that TE ratio test. So if you're a smart doper, you can kind of, get your TE ratio down into the right window and pass it. Because very few, if any, athletic commissions do a test for synthetic testosterone, which is why VADA is so effective, because they use that test right in their screener, right off the top. They always test for EPO and they always test for testosterone. Where I stand is, in other sports like baseball, I don't really care. Cycling, I don't really care. I kind of care about the health and safety of people. And I think when you're doing black market stuff, it's very dangerous. But in boxing, energy's at a premium. So like Shane Mosley in the De La Hoya rematch used EPO, which increases red blood cell count, increases your energy. So one guy's getting tired and the other guy's coming on in the back end of the fight because he's not. People can get killed that way. I think in boxing and in MMA, doping is just criminal. And I think it needs to be stamped out. I don't think that we're quite doing the right things to get that done, but I'm definitely against it. How many boxers are using it? I don't want to say 90%, because I know that there are clean fighters out there that are trying to set an example and do things the right way. But I will say this, to quote Memo Heredia, it's like my favorite quote of his. He says that peak performance at the elite level in the sports without doping is a fairy tale, my friend. So I don't know, take that for what you will. He's the guy that got Juan Manuel Marquez. He trained him for the 3rd and 4th Pacquiao fight. So if you look at that body and how it changed, I don't know, you tell me how many people are doping, I remember it was Eric Morales tweeted the one with the best pharmacy won, and then deleted the tweet after the 4th fight. So
I always work on the basis that if Canelo gets caught, if Fury got caught, if Dillian White got caught, they're the ones who have got all of the money. They can put the best medics in place. They can put all the science behind it. Conor Benn can put all the science behind it. Now, if they're still getting caught for things, and they're the ones that are tested most frequently, presumably, for what we're told, and I know an awful lot of boxers levels below that in the UK that don't get tested until they reach, say, Commonwealth title level. So there's no deterrent to actually doing these things because they know that there's no testing bodies. UCAD don't come around and test people at English title level. They don't do it at area title level and below. I don't know how that situation sits in the US, whether there is a more serious approach to it, kind of below the higher levels, or is it that, you know, similar to the UK, nobody's getting tested until you hit X level?
Yeah, I mean, I think I remember asking the BBOC, or the BBBOC. It's like it always trips me up. How many guys they had licensed? I think it was a given time it was like 1,500 people licensed.
Yeah.
They don't really have the budget to test all those guys, and I
No.
think one of the last pieces I wrote, I think it was for Boxing News out in the UK. I went to all the signatories on the Association of Boxing Commissions. It was like 76 different commissions because you're counting native nations as well as the 50 states in the United States. That's 76 different people or different commissions, 76 different ways to drug test. And I surveyed them all, said, what are your drug testing protocols? And the range came from, the bulk of them was complete silence, to, oh, we've heard about drug testing. We'll have to look into that, to, New York with its giant loophole, and Nevada, which has gotten better, and California, which has gotten better. But they're still not always testing for EPO, and they're still not testing for synthetic testosterone. So it's this wide range, and you've got all these fights happening, a ton in California, a ton in Nevada. I don't think very many are getting tested. Maybe the main events are getting tested, but you're getting tested on the night. You're not getting tested in camp, right? And so, like Victor Conte of Balco, ex-PED dealer, now strength and conditioning coach, although he puts a lot of his guys in VADA and was an early adopter of VADA, he would say that when you fail a drug test, you failed two tests: a drug test and an IQ test, because it's just so easy to get through. These testing programs they're kind of a joke.
Yeah, and what you say about Victor Conte being an advocate and a user of VADA, like, I'm not accusing him of doing anything, but sure, were I someone who's an expert on these things and I knew what they're testing for, I think I'd probably be an advocate of using certain testing bodies if it meant potentially I could get an advantage for the people that I work with. Take it back to Conor Benn, and exactly what you just said then about an IQ test. His personal doctor was Dr. Usman, who, I don't know how familiar you are with Dr. Usman.
A little bit.
Testosterone replacement therapy specialist, BBBFC board licensed doctor, which,
right,
in and of itself,
makes no sense.
Yeah, why are the board licensing people that go around specializing in testosterone replacement therapy? I would ask that question of Robert Smith.
Yeah, I would like to know the answer to that too. I mean, one of the things I covered about Keith Kaiser back in, I want to say 2010, 2012, somewhere in there. I haven't read, I don't read my articles on a regular basis 10 years later, but this was all during the testosterone replacement therapy boom of the mid 2000s, right? And all these anti-aging clinics were popping up all over the place. And it turned out that Keith Kaiser at the time held a seminar for most of the UFC's roster. And the seminar was about how to get a therapeutic use exemption for testosterone. Now, if you're a peak athlete and you have low T, and you haven't really gone through an endocrinologist, you're just going to it takes about a year to really test a guy to find out if he's low T. If you're really doing it with an endocrinologist, not just a quack who's trying to sell you testosterone. To me, the reason that a top level athlete like that would need it is that you've been doing steroids and you've kind of blown out your endocrine system, and now you need to supplement it. Because what happens when you take one of these substances that's an anabolic steroid that apes testosterone, you're getting so much testosterone, your body stops producing it. And then it starts kicking out other things. If you have too much testosterone, your body starts kicking out more estrogen to balance it out. And you stop taking the drug, but your body still has estrogen. So you take a thing like Clomid, which is an estrogen blocker. That way you don't end up with breasts, or other problems. And so you kind of balance it out. That's what Clomid is generally used for, like by bodybuilders. It's an end of cycle drug. So, that's an executive director telling all these athletes how to get through this loophole in a state where there's already a giant loophole. Um, I've never figured out, never got an answer. Keith was, it's a strange thing in the US is that the executive director, at least in Nevada, that position is connected to the attorney general's office. They're all lawyers you're dealing with. And I remember the more hostile he got with me and the more I kept pushing back, one day I just got a call from an attorney general or a junior attorney general there, and just started grilling me about why I was bothering Keith Kaiser. It was like a scare tactic. Um, it's just like I was just answering honest questions. So your question is, I think somebody over there needs to ask that of Robert Smith. Like, why would you have this doctor there? What is the need here? Because no athlete in their prime needs testosterone replacement therapy unless they've been doing drugs. That's just my opinion.
And one of the things to pick up on what you were saying there about the Clomid being a post-cycle masking agent, which has been covered to some length over in the UK. Clomid is, of course, the substance that Conor Benn has been found to have been taken under VADA. How can I
or
word
clomiphene.
it? So yeah, it's a good clomiphene. How do I word it so I don't get myself in trouble? But that's what he's failed the test for. Has been well documented. I saw a tweet you put out the other day actually about you'd like to know how it is contaminated. If that's the route we're going down, is it's a contaminated test? How? Like, at what point in the cycle, not in the cycle, but in the cycle of life, has that got contaminated? Are we talking? Is it the testing process? Is it the eggs? As we're being told, it's perhaps the eggs. What was your view when contamination came out as a potential reason behind the Conor Benn scenario?
Well, it reminded me of a story of when Andre Berto tested positive ahead of his rematch with Victor Ortiz. He tested positive for nandrolone. Nandrolone, dating back to earlier cases with one of Victor Conte's athletes, he had tested positive for nandrolone, and Victor went on an investigation looking into different labs and found his conclusion was like if you're buying a black market drug, the reason you'd get hit with nandrolone is like if somebody was buying nandrolone in the lab, they weren't cleaning their instruments, they made another drug and the nandrolone got in there. And the nandrolone is like known as the kiss of death because its half-life, which means like half of the substance getting out of your body, takes about 18 months. So like even just like a little speck of like salt of nandrolone will come up positive. It's a powerful drug. So you're always wondering like with contamination, to me, it's like, okay, the Hearn and Ben's story doesn't make any sense to me. You're telling me that he has only trace amounts, but it's probably contamination. So it's contaminated just enough so that you metabolized it and it still stayed in your system, but it wasn't enough to be performance enhancing. Those are like two different stories that you're trying to tell. You need to pick one. He's either like, accidentally ingested it, or it was some sort of contamination, but it doesn't, or rather you either contaminated or you have trace amounts. Like to me, it can't be both, and the trace amounts thing is, to me, you're just playing with language. You're just trying to capitalize on people's ignorance. And I think from that time, from 2010 to now, I've just seen people on Twitter knowing what, the A and B sample means. And like, we all know these terms that were kind of alien to us 10 years ago. You can't pull the wool over people's eyes like this. Trace elements, of course it is. Your body metabolized it, and then they caught trace elements. You may have been trying to flush it, and especially since he had a positive, July 25th?
Yeah.
Out of the drug testing program that they had signed up for. It was in the WBC's clean boxing program. So it was just a spot check, and they caught him. And then again, September 1st, I don't know, how contaminated was it? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me, the contamination theory, if you're going with just also trace amounts. To me, it's like he got caught at the end of his cycle, or maybe he was microdosing and trying to use small amounts to escape detection, and they didn't do it right. It just, it doesn't wash, in my opinion.
Does it surprise you when you hear that boxers have failed drugs tests? And I mean that from a sense of they should be better at it. Certainly those with the resources to be better at it shouldn't fail drugs tests. But we all know it's I'm not saying everybody's doing it, and when I said earlier, almost flippantly, 90% in my view are probably doing it. There are some that haven't been caught, and people will always argue, well, they've not been caught, they can't be guilty.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Lance Armstrong.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's a very flawed argument, but I understand why people do it. As people get more and more educated, as you said, around A and B samples, around the terminology, the language that's used on these things, like trace amounts, as if somebody's going to be found with like a weapons grade amount of clomiphene within their system. They're not. They're going to be found with trace amounts because that's what's going to be in the system. It's not going to be 2 kilos of it knocking about in your veins.
They're
It's
literally, yeah, they're metabolites. Yeah, it's trade that there would be a trace amount.
yeah. So do
Am I
you?
surprised?
Yeah. Are you ever
Oh, sorry.
surprised by it?
Um, no. Well, I guess yes and no. It kind of depends on the guy. Like we've seen Conor Benn's body kind of change, all of a sudden having this cracking power and just blowing through guys, and that just raises red flags for me. I'm not usually an eye test guy, particularly because boxers are so strange. They peak out and then they dehydrate for a week, and their bodies kind of blow up within 36 hours. I think drug use in the sport is on a spectrum. I've always felt that, and I haven't been able to, I haven't done the research to prove this, but that making weight is the gateway drug, is like the gateway to performance enhancing drugs for a couple reasons. One, as guys get bigger and they're starting to get that payday in their weight class, but their body's aging out of it, you might take a drug, in order to like a diuretic or something. I remember interviewing Paulie Malignaggi, and he was talking about. I was talking about 2 positives, and I think it was in the Mayweather gym, where there was diuretics used, and he was like, "Oh, that's not really that big of a deal." And I was like, "Well, one, it's a masking agent, but it's like also you're kind of telling on yourself." But to me, the weight problem, the weight cutting problem, guys are damaging their endocrine systems. You're doing all kinds of things by dehydrating yourself. And so maybe you end up maybe you get low T from that or low energy. So then you start taking something else to kind of, up your testosterone or build muscle mass, whatever, while you're cutting weight or while you're training. I just think that opens the door for it. You get used to taking a diuretic, then here, take this other pill. This will help you do this thing. Yeah. And then down the road you go. But I am surprised that guys get caught because most fighters kind of control their window at a certain point of when they're going to fight. So if you know when you're going to fight, you know when the commission's going to test you on fight night. But if you're entering into VADA, the V stands for voluntary, and you're saying to your opponent, we're going to test from this time to this time. Now you know the window of testing. You can dope for months before that, keep the benefits. That's what Lance Armstrong did, and then go clean and then hit your testing program and do your training camp and have all the benefits of the dope that you did for the 3 or 4 months before. As Conte would say, you need to test year round because you got to catch the fish when, put the hook in the water when the fish are biting, not when they're chilling, and they've already, post cycle. So I always think guys, when guys test positive, it's like a peek into their window or into their cycle, and that they maybe screwed something up.
Yeah.
So yeah.
If we take it only at the very top level, so if we assume, say, kind of world title fights and just below, and I realize that's difficult to quantify, but if we try and make that assumption for the next question, which is how do you solve the problem? And I say that because of and the world title aspect. There's not the money in the sport to be taking it even down to like British title level or American equivalents. If we just assume the money's there at world title level and kind of mandatory defenses, those that are getting into those positions, kind of top 10 within governing bodies, those kind of positions. Is it biological passports? Is that the solution, do you think, to doping?
I think that's a good solution. I think more testing. Like if you look at like the US drug war, right? Adding more years, putting people away for decades because of dealing drugs or doing drugs, hasn't really worked. Drugs are more prevalent, cheaper, easier to get than ever before. So to me, I think, if you're looking at it, that model, like guys are always saying, we need lifetime bans and that. Every drug user thinks it ain't going to be me.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get caught, because fighters are always thinking I'm not the one that's going to lose. It's just part of their DNA.
Yeah.
So what I think is you expand the budget, um, whether it's a tax on the promoters or whatever it is, and you expand the amount of testing that you do, because VADA, like the BBOC, like the clean boxing program, you've got all these fighters in the top 15 of the WBC getting tested, or in order to be eligible to even be ranked by the WBC, you have to sign up for this VADA program. You're only going to get tested maybe once a year. It's more of like the old school doping mentality of the possibility of being tested is the deterrent. I don't think that works. I think everybody needs to get tested maybe 8 times a year. And that way there's never really a window where you're just got tested, now I've got time to dope. You may not even have enough time to do a program that gives you any good results. So I think more testing is a way to kind of to solve the problem. But also, when a guy tests positive, Canelo did this, and I think Lucas Brown was the first guy to do this. If you want to prove that you weren't using for a long period of time, do the hair follicle test. It's kind of newer science, but science is always evolving. You take body hair, which is apparently better than head hair, because we're hitting it with shampoo and conditioner and product and sunlight.
Yeah, and Lucas Brown was never going to sign up for that one either.
Right, but he did the body hair,
yeah.
and Canelo did the same thing. There is kind of a spectrum where I think lighter hair is harder to test than darker hair, for whatever reason. But I think that's something that's newer science that needs to get adopted. It's kind of a confirmative test, and Canelo apparently passed it. He also proved receipts. This is where I bought the quote unquote contaminated meat. And clenbuterol does have a history of contamination, and people proving it, but you don't have to be a Canelo apologist. But he at least went through the things, and then he did a year of VADA just for himself, like, where we're going to test me constantly throughout the year. I think that needs to be the standard. If Conor Benn wants to prove that he's innocent, try doing that. Try actually doing the things to prove that you're innocent, instead of throwing shade on the testing program. Because honestly, I've been following doping for so long. That strategy just says that, they hired an experienced doping lawyer, which they have.
Yeah. Yeah, they've hired Chris Froome's lawyer, didn't they? I think, which.
And Tyson Fury and Huey Fury's guy. I think also Dillian White, Mike Morgan, I believe is his name.
Yeah, he's got a good success rate.
Well, yeah.
I'll say no more.
But if you look at their arguments, like when reporters press them, they all kind of approach things the same way.
Yeah.
It's very rare that you see. I think it was baseball player Andy Pettitte of the Yankees at the time. He was one of the only guys who got caught, and I saw him go, you know what? I did this drug. This is why I did it. And people don't think of him in the negative light because he was so upfront about it. You never see boxers do that.
Larry Olabamiwo. He was the only one.
Oh yeah, I did a 2-parter with Larry. I did the interview with him post positive, and well, he was a wealth of knowledge, and also proof positive that you don't have to be high level in the game to have a high level doping program. That guy was doing all kinds of drugs.
Yeah, I mean, he was very well educated himself on the subject, so was able to make up his own program. But listen to him now. He talks about what these people are doing and where it's all going, and he's done various pieces over the last couple of years on PitchBoxing with Richard Poxon, on Highfield Boxing podcast. He's done loads of stuff that covers this subject of the sport. Hours of conversation from first-hand experience of having done it.
Larry's great.
And
he's an actor now, which is great.
Yeah. I mean, why the sport doesn't employ Larry Olabamiwo in some way to say, right, point us at where you think the problems might be, and then we'll go and take a look under those areas.
It was the same thing with Victor Conte as well. It was like guys look at him as like, oh, he's a drug cheat. I don't want to hear it from him. The guy flipped a long time ago and is a wealth of knowledge. I spent a lot of time talking to Victor and learning from him. It always does make me wonder, like, why does he always know exactly what the drugs are that people are using? But, I mean, I watched him build his new gym. His whole thing now is he does, modulated oxygen training, which is like simulated, like the guys get in like these domes, and he does like, high altitude training and hyper oxygenating guys, but also doing hypoxic training, kind of restricting their oxygen, and he's trying to do the same thing, trick out your endocrine system to deal with extreme situations and kick up HGH and EPO and testosterone, but naturally through stressing the body. He's not changed in that regard, but I believe he's an anti-doping advocate, and I wish the sport would listen to those guys. I also can see Victor's a bit of a bulldog and kind of annoyed people because he's kind of a my way or the highway guy, but he's an expert, but I don't think the commissions really want to solve the problem.
No.
There's too much money in it,
No, and often if you look at the UK examples of UCAD, for instance, where they have found the likes of Tyson Fury and Dillian White, and they've identified them as having positive tests, UCAD have then been dragged through the court system. And it's cost them millions and millions of pounds, of which they probably, they're government funded. They don't have that money to take these cases on. So they probably don't really want to find the problems.
No, and it's also, think about all the revenue that was lost, local revenue, from the hotels, restaurants, all the people coming through, not just, the fight. It's Floyd really kind of opened a can of worms for people. I have my opinions of why he did that. I won't say why. Well, I don't know. I mean, he did get caught. He got caught with an illegal IV.
Yeah, the IV the night before the Pacquiao fight, didn't he?
Yeah, he also threatened to sue me in my heyday for spreading a rumor that he had tested positive 3 times and it had been covered up by USADA. They sent me a cease and desist, which I printed the next week, and they never sued me. I always found that strange. You told me that if I kept doing this, you would, and I actually never said 3 times. I said a test had been covered up, and they were the ones that said 3 times. But then Thomas Hauser kind of took that work and moved forward with it and exposed that Floyd had incredibly low TE ratio levels before a couple fights, which may have to some signified past use. It seemed odd. To me, I'm just speaking theoretically, but it kind of reminded me of Lance Armstrong, only doing certain races because he was controlling the window of what he was testing. And Floyd, as we know, only fought in May and September and was kind of targeting guys, I think, that he thought were users. So it was kind of a guy controlling other people's window, in my opinion. But what do I know? I'm just an
yeah, I could talk to you all day about it. It's fascinating. But thank you so much for your time in going through these things and giving an insight into your expertise. It's hugely appreciated.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime.
Excellent. I shall leave you to go and enjoy the joys of Paris as well. For while the sun's out and the leaf blowers have stopped, you can go and see the city. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it for PitchBoxing. It's been great.
Oh, my pleasure.